Ethan Thorne adjusted the collar of his linen shirt. The familiar scent of pine and lake water, a comforting balm against the subtle hum of anxiety beneath his skin. His lake cabin, nestled deep in the embrace of ancient cedars, was more than just a retreat. Tonight, it was a sanctuary, a clandestine meeting point where the future of the state hung in a precarious balance. The last rays of the sun painted the sky in streaks of fiery orange and soft lavender, casting long, dancing shadows through the tall windows overlooking the glass-smooth surface of Lake Serenity. He checked his watch for the third time in as, many minutes, 6:57, David Chen, the state attorney general, was notoriously punctual. Not a minute early, never a minute late. Ethan admired that about him, among many other things. Chen's reputation was built on precision, a razor-sharp intellect, and an unwavering moral compass that had, over the past year, set him on a collision course with some of the most entrenched powers in the state. Tonight's discussion, a preliminary strategy session for what promised to be a landmark prosecution, needed absolute discretion. No leaks, no distractions, no unforeseen complications. The cabin itself was a testament to understated luxury and profound peace. Built by his grandfather, it had witnessed generations of Thorne family summers, evolving from a rustic fishing shack into a modern, yet still charmingly rustic, architectural marvel. Polished dark wood gleamed under the soft glow of sconces, and a massive stone fireplace dominated the living area. A large, circular poker table, its felt worn smooth by countless games, sat proudly in the center, currently cleared for stacks of legal binders and a thermos of artisanal coffee. Sarah, Ethan's long-suffering executive assistant, moved with efficient grace, setting out a platter of gourmet cheeses and a carafe of chilled water. Her usually unflappable demeanor was tinged with a faint nervousness, mirroring Ethan's own. She knew the stakes. She'd meticulously vetted the route, confirmed the security sweeps, and handled every detail with military precision. Everything. Set, Sarah? Ethan asked, his voice low. As much as it can be, Mr. Thorne, she replied, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. His security detail confirmed arrival in approximately 3 minutes. I'll be in the guest cabin down the path, maintaining calm silence unless absolutely necessary. The encrypted line is active. Excellent. You've been invaluable, as always. A faint hum grew in the distance, quickly resolving into the distinct whir of a powerful engine. A sleek, dark SUV, followed by another, emerged from the winding, private drive. They were here. Ethan walked to the front door, opening it just as the lead vehicle glided to a silent halt. David Chen, a man whose presence filled a room even before he entered it, stepped out. He was impeccably dressed, as always, even for a casual lakeside meeting. Dark trousers, a crisp button-down, a lightweight blazer. His silver hair, meticulously combed, caught the last glimmer of the setting sun. Ethan, good to see you. Chen's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and intelligent, taking in the serene surroundings. David, welcome. Everything was straightforward, I trust? Smooth as silk. Your instructions were precise. Chen gestured vaguely towards his security detail, 2 hulking figures already fanning out to secure the perimeter. They were ghosts, fading into the deepening shadows of the forest. They'll keep their distance. We need to talk freely. Of course. Ethan led him inside, the heavy oak door closing with a soft thud, sealing them off from the world. Coffee? Or something stronger to cut through the day's residue? Coffee, thank you. Black. It's going to be a long night, I suspect. Chen's gaze landed on the binders on the poker table. The material is extensive. It is. And the implications, more so. They settled into comfortable leather armchairs by the fireplace, the coffee steaming between them. The initial pleasantries gave way to a palpable shift in atmosphere as Chen opened the first binder. Ethan watched him, admiring the calm intensity, the way Chen's mind seemed to absorb complex information with effortless speed. "So," Chen began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "this bribery ring, it goes higher than we initially suspected." "Far higher," Ethan nodded. "The new data from the encrypted server points directly to Senator Albright's office. Not just his campaign manager, but evidence suggesting his direct involvement." "Albright? That's a seismic event, Ethan. The governor's closest ally. This could bring down the entire administration." Chen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. "Are we absolutely certain about the chain of custody for this digital evidence? It'll be attacked from every angle." "Sarah and I have triple-checked. The forensic report is impeccable. Timestamps, IP addresses, everything. It's ironclad. The anonymous tipster provided access to an offshore server they'd been using for dark accounting." Ethan paused, considering. "What's your gut telling you, David? Can we weather the storm?" "Albright will fight dirty." "Albright will bring a Category 5 hurricane, Ethan. But my gut tells me we have to try. The integrity of the state depends on it. We let this slide, and we may as well shut down the AG's office. The public trust is already hanging by a thread." They spent the next hour meticulously poring over documents, their voices hushed, the weight of their discussion filling the quiet cabin. The evening deepened, the last vestiges of twilight fading into a star-strewn canvas. The lake became an inky black expanse, reflecting the distant twinkle of scattered lights across the shore. Suddenly, a distant, muffled shout pierced the serene silence. Ethan frowned, his head tilting slightly. He dismissed it as a distant fisherman or a late-night boater. The private road leading to his cabin was clearly marked, privately owned, and rarely used by anyone other than permitted guests. Then another shout, closer this time, and unmistakably female. It carried a sharp edge of anger. Chen paused, looking up from his brief. "Everything all right out there?" "Probably just a lost hiker, David. This road can be a bit confusing at night, even with the signage. We have excellent security," Ethan offered. A reassuring smile, though a faint prickle of unease had begun to form at the back of his neck. The shouts grew louder, more insistent, and then the unmistakable sound of a car engine, revving aggressively, followed by the crunching of gravel, far too close to the cabin's immediate vicinity. This was not a lost hiker. "What in the blazes?" Chen muttered, his brow furrowing. His hand instinctively moved towards his phone, though he stopped himself, glancing at Ethan. This was Ethan's domain. Before Ethan could react, a piercing, ear-splitting shriek ripped through the air, followed by a violent thud against the front door, rattling the entire frame. "Open this door! You can't hide from me!" A woman's voice, shrill with fury, boomed from outside. Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. This was Beatrice Stone, B., his estranged neighbor, with whom he'd been embroiled in a bitter, years-long boundary dispute over a sliver of land and a misplaced boathouse. The dispute had escalated from minor nuisances to outright harassment, culminating in a restraining order Ethan had been forced to file 6 months prior. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. The restraining order was very clear. She was not to come within 500 feet of his property. He sprang to his feet, a wave of cold dread washing over him. "Excuse me, David. There seems to be an unfortunate misunderstanding." He forced a calm tone he didn't feel. "It's a neighbor. She's had some issues." "Issues?" Chen raised a sardonic eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the commotion. "She sounds quite determined to resolve them." Another crash against the door, harder this time. "I know you're in there, Thorne. You can't fool me. This is my property. You stole it." "She seems to think this cabin is hers," Ethan admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. "Long story, restraining order. I thought she'd finally gotten the message." "A restraining order, you say? And she's currently breaching it quite emphatically." Chen's voice was dry, but his eyes were now sharp, assessing the situation. This was far from the quiet, secure meeting he'd anticipated. "Just a moment, David," Ethan said, moving towards the door. He tried to think. How to handle this? B was irrational, prone to explosive outbursts. The last thing he needed was a public scene, especially with the state attorney general present. He considered calling his security, but they were instructed to maintain distance unless a direct threat to Chen was imminent. A hysterical woman shouting about property lines hardly qualified. Yet, he unlatched the heavy bolts, opening the door a crack. Beatrice Stone, her face a mask of furious indignation, stood on his porch. Her usually neatly coiffed blonde hair was disheveled, her eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed on him with a psychotic intensity. She wore a faded tracksuit and clutched a large rusted wrench in one hand, pointed at the ground but clearly present. "Thorne, you slimy cheat! I knew you'd come back here. I saw your lights. You thought you could just waltz in and take what's mine, didn't you?" Her voice was a grating, high-pitched screech. "Beatrice, you need to leave. You are trespassing. You are in violation of a restraining order. I will call the police." Ethan kept his voice low, calm, trying to inject some reason into the chaotic scene. His gaze flickered past her, seeing her ancient, dented sedan parked haphazardly across his carefully manicured gravel driveway. "Police? Ha! I'll call the police on you. You're the one who stole my land." "My both." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the distant call of a loon. Beatrice Stone stood frozen, the rusty wrench dangling uselessly from her fingers, her face a grotesque parody of her earlier rage. The manic fire in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a dawning, terrifying comprehension. David Chen, State Attorney General. The words echoed in the suddenly cavernous space of Ethan's living room, each syllable a hammer blow to her deranged conviction. Ethan watched her, a strange mix of pity and grim satisfaction warring within him. For years, B had been a relentless torment, a shadow lurking at the edges of his peace. Now, in a single catastrophic moment of her own making, she had collided with an immovable force. This wasn't just a simple restraining order violation anymore. This was an assault on public order, witnessed by its chief enforcer. Chen remained impassive, his gaze fixed on B, a silent, unblinking challenge. He didn't need to say more. The weight of his office, the implied power, hung heavy in the air. Slowly, agonizingly, B's eyes drifted from Chen's badge to Ethan, a flicker of bewildered betrayal crossing her face. You set me up," she whispered, her voice a reedy, broken sound, utterly unlike the banshee shriek from moments before. "B!" "No one set you up," Ethan said, his voice softer than he intended. "You trespassed. You broke a restraining order. You damaged my property. In front of the Attorney General. These are all your choices." Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of desperate self-pity. "But this is my cabin. It's mine." The delusion was too deeply ingrained to be shed even in the face of such overwhelming reality. Chen finally broke his silence. "Ethan," he said, his tone still level, "do you wish to press charges?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Ethan thought of the years of harassment, the sleepless nights, the legal fees, the sheer emotional drain of dealing with B's increasingly unhinged behavior. He thought of the shattered coat rack, the violated sanctuary of his cabin, the disruption to this crucial meeting, justice, karma, both whispered in his ear. "Yes, David," Ethan said, his voice firm, unwavering. "I do. I want her removed from my property and held accountable for her actions. This has gone on long enough." B gasped, a raw, choked sound. "No, you can't. I'll tell them everything about your dark money, your schemes." Her voice was rising again, a desperate, flailing attempt to regain control. Chen merely raised an eyebrow, a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "My security detail is equipped with body cameras, ma'am. Every word you've uttered since entering the driveway, every action you've taken, has been recorded and encrypted. Your revelations will be noted." He reached for his phone, his movements fluid and precise. "Considering the circumstances, I'll call the local sheriff myself. This situation requires a direct report." He stepped away from the poker table, moving towards the entrance, speaking calmly into his phone, relaying the address and the nature of the disturbance. Bee watched him, her eyes wide, her lower lip trembling. The wrench slipped from her grasp and clattered to the polished wood floor, a pathetic sound in the sudden quiet. Ethan, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief, simply leaned against the fireplace mantel, watching the dramatic collapse of his tormentor. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens began to grow. Chen ended his call, returning to the poker table. He picked up his blazer, shaking his head slightly at the splintered coat rack, a faint frown creasing his brow. "My apologies, Ethan. This was an unforeseen complication." "Not your fault, David. You saved me a lengthy explanation to local law enforcement and probably a lot of future headaches." Ethan offered a weak smile. Two sheriff's vehicles, lights flashing, pulled up the driveway, followed shortly by one of Chen's black SUVs. The security detail, no longer ghosts, emerged from the shadows, their faces grim, their presence a silent assertion of authority. Sheriff Thompson, a burly man with a weathered face and tired eyes who knew Ethan well from previous interactions regarding Bea, entered first. He took in the scene, the disheveled Beatrice, the splintered coat rack, and most importantly, David Chen, State Attorney General, standing calmly by the poker table. "Attorney General Chen," Thompson said, his voice laced with surprise and respect. "Good evening, sir. What seems to be the trouble?" He glanced at Bea, then at Ethan, a slow understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd dealt with Bea before. "Sheriff," Chen responded, his voice authoritative but calm. "This woman, Beatrice Stone, has trespassed onto Mr. Thorne's private property, in direct violation of a standing restraining order. She has also caused significant property damage." Chen gestured to the fallen coat rack. "She appears to be suffering from a severe delusion regarding property ownership." Thompson nodded slowly, his gaze hardening as he looked at Bea. "Miss Stone, you know this is Mr. Thorne's property, and you know about the restraining order. We've been over this." Bea, still stunned, could only stammer. He stole it. He cheated my family. Ask him about his big deals. The corruption." She pointed a trembling finger at Ethan, then at Chen. Thompson sighed. "Ma'am, we have documented all your previous claims. They've been thoroughly investigated and dismissed by the courts. Now I'm going to have to ask you to come with us." He signaled to his deputies. As the deputies moved to escort Bea, she resisted weakly, muttering incoherently about injustices and stolen legacies. Her eyes, still wide with a dawning horror, landed on Chen again, then on the binders on the table. For a fleeting second, a spark of something beyond her usual delusion crossed her face. A hint that she sensed the gravity of the meeting she had so spectacularly interrupted. Then, she was being led out, her protests fading as the cabin door closed behind her, sealing them back into the relative quiet. Ethan let out a long, slow breath. The tension, which had coiled tight in his stomach, began to loosen, but a new kind of anxiety settled in. The incident had ripped open the meticulously constructed bubble of security and discretion. Chen returned to the poker table, picking up a stray page that had fluttered to the floor during the commotion. He smoothed it carefully. "Well," he said, looking at Ethan, "that was certainly unexpected. An understatement," Ethan agreed. "My deepest apologies, David. This was the last thing I wanted to happen." No apology necessary. One deals with the unexpected. Chen's gaze lingered on the broken coat rack for a moment. However, it does raise questions about the security of this location for a meeting of this nature. If a single, deluded individual can breach your perimeter so easily, what about someone with more malicious intent? Ethan felt a cold prickle of fear. Chen was right. The security detail was for external threats, high-level organized attempts. They hadn't anticipated a local, unhinged woman with a wrench. My assistant, Sarah, handles the initial screening and external security. She's usually impeccable. The private road is clearly marked and motion sensors are in place. B must have bypassed them somehow or found a way around them through the brush she knows so well. She knows the land, Chen mused, his eyes now distant, thinking. That could be a problem. Senator Albright is not known for playing fair. If he were to discover the nature of our meeting, he might exploit any vulnerability, or even create one. The quiet cabin, moments ago a refuge, now felt exposed, vulnerable. The very air seemed to crackle with the unspoken threat of retaliation. This changes things, Chen continued, tapping a finger on the open binder. We cannot afford any distractions, any potential for a leak. Not when we're dealing with evidence that could dismantle a significant portion of the state government. Albright has eyes everywhere. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. I understand. What do you suggest? Chen walked to the window, gazing out at the now completely dark lake. His reflection, a silhouette against the starlit water, seemed thoughtful, calculating. We finish our work tonight. The information is too critical to postpone, but our next meeting will not be here, and we will need to reconsider the level of security, Ethan, for both of us, especially for you, given your proximity to this woman and her unique issues. He turned back, his expression serious. This incident, while seemingly minor in the grand scheme of things, is a stark reminder of how easily the unexpected can unravel even the most carefully laid plans. We are dealing with powerful, desperate people, Ethan. They will stop at nothing. The weight of Chen's words settled heavily upon Ethan. The intrusion wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a chilling forewarning. B, in her deranged fury, had unknowingly highlighted a fatal flaw in their operation, a vulnerability that a truly ruthless adversary like Albright would exploit without hesitation. The stakes, already sky-high, had just been raised again, and Ethan realized with a jolt that his lake cabin, his sanctuary, might now be the very thing that put him, and more importantly, the case, in gravest danger. The faint, receding wail of the siren served as a final, ominous punctuation mark to the night's events, fading into the vast, indifferent expanse of Lake Serenity. The chill of the pre-dawn air seeped into the cabin, a stark contrast to the simmering heat of the previous night's confrontation. Ethan Thorne hadn't slept. The image of Beatrice Stone's contorted face, the flash of Chen's badge, and the quiet, damning assessment of his security vulnerability replayed in a relentless loop in his mind. He sat at the kitchen island, a mug of cold coffee forgotten in his hand, staring out at the lake now shrouded in a ghostly mist. Sarah, ever the early riser, entered the kitchen, her movements hushed. She stopped short, seeing the weariness etched on Ethan's face. "Rough night, Mr. Thorne?" she asked softly. Ethan managed a wry smile. "An understatement, Sarah. B decided to make a rather dramatic return." He briefly recounted the incident, omitting none of the embarrassing details, especially Chen's pointed critique of the security. Sarah listened, her expression shifting, from concern to professional indignation. "I apologize, Mr. Thorne. My protocols were sound. The motion sensors, she must have come through the deep woods, avoiding the main path and the sensor lines I established. She knows the land better than us, Sarah. Her family was here long before mine, old logging trails, forgotten deer paths. She probably used them all. It's not your fault. It was an unforeseen vector of attack. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Chen was right, though. If she could get in, someone else could too. Someone with far more malicious intent. "What about Miss Stone?" Sarah asked, her tone hardening. "Did the sheriff—" She was taken into custody. Trespassing. Restraining order violation. Property damage. Chen made the call personally. "I pressed charges. It's over, finally. For now, at least." The words felt hollow, a temporary reprieve rather than a true resolution. "Good," Sarah said with conviction. "She's been a menace." She moved to the espresso machine, the whirring sound cutting through the quiet. "What are the plans for today? The Attorney General left early?" He did. His team arrived to collect him just before sunrise. We managed to get through most of the critical data. He's confident we have enough to proceed with Albright, but we're switching to a new, undisclosed location for subsequent meetings. And he's ordered an immediate upgrade to my personal security and yours. Discreet, but effective. Sarah paused, a steaming mug of espresso in her hand. "Senator Albright will not take this lying down." "He won't," Ethan confirmed. "He'll know. Something's brewing, even if he doesn't know precisely what. And he'll use every dirty trick in his book. This incident with B, it highlights a vulnerability he might very well exploit. He has people everywhere, as Chen said." As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but the prefix suggested it was a local area code, not one of his usual contacts. He hesitated, then answered. "Ethan Thorne," he stated, his voice wary. A gravelly, deceptively calm voice on the other end spoke. "Mr. Thorne, you're a hard man to reach. Name's Wallace." Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Wallace. Former state senator, now a shadowy, self-styled fixer for powerful figures like Albright. A man known for his brutal efficiency and utter lack of scruples. "What do you want, Wallace?" Ethan asked, his grip tightening on the phone. "Just a friendly chat, Mr. Thorne. Heard you had a little incident at your lovely lakeside retreat last night. A bit of a kerfuffle, shall we say? About property lines, I hear." Wallace chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Must be frustrating, dealing with such misunderstandings." A wave of icy dread washed over Ethan. How did Wallace know? So quickly? The sheriff's report wouldn't have been public yet. This meant Albright had eyes and ears everywhere, even within local law enforcement, or worse, within Chen's own inner circle. "My private matters are none of your concern, Wallace." "Oh, but they are, Mr. Thorne. When your private matters intersect with the interests of certain influential people, they become everyone's concern, especially when those influential people are unhappy. And Senator Albright is very unhappy. He tells me you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm merely upholding the law." "The law is a malleable thing, Mr. Thorne, especially when one has friends in high places and enemies in rather confined spaces, like, say, a county jail." Wallace's voice dropped, becoming a low, chilling purr. "I hear your little problem, Ms. Stone, is rather distraught, and surprisingly, she's talking a lot about you, about corruption, about schemes, about dark money. Convenient, isn't it? Such a vulnerable witness, spouting off allegations. That, while baseless, could be amplified." Ethan's mind raced. Wallace was trying to intimidate him, to leverage B's erratic behavior. They would twist her delusions, use her as a puppet. The dark money she had screamed about was a direct hit at the bribery allegations against Albright. If they could make it seem like Ethan was the one involved in shadowy dealings, using a deranged woman as proof, it could undermine the entire case. She's a delusional woman, Wallace. Her claims won't hold up. Perhaps not in a court of law, Mr. Thorne, but in the court of public opinion. A few well-placed leaks, a sympathetic reporter, a story about a heroic local woman fighting against a corrupt elite. It could get messy. Very messy. Distractions, Mr. Thorne. That's all it takes to derail a prosecution. Public sentiment is a powerful weapon. What do you want? Ethan asked, cutting to the chase. A simple cessation of hostilities. Drop your involvement with the Attorney General's current inquiry, back off, and Ms. Stone's misunderstandings will be resolved. Perhaps a quiet transfer to a facility where she can receive appropriate care. Far more comfortable than a jail cell, I assure you. No charges, no public spectacle, and your reputation remains untarnished by her wild claims. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. This wasn't just about stopping the case. It was about destroying Ethan's credibility, using B as a pawn. And if I don't? Ethan challenged, his voice cold. Wallace chuckled again, the sound like pebbles rattling in a tin can. Then, Mr. Thorne, the misunderstanding around Ms. Stone's arrest will become a very public, very ugly affair, and her wild claims might suddenly find a very receptive audience. Imagine the Attorney General's star witness, a woman accusing him and his key collaborator of corruption. The optics, Mr. Thorne, would be devastating for your little integrity crusade. And Miss Stone? Well, she's not doing so well in general. A little public pressure, a little stress. Who knows what might happen to her? Or to her legacy. The implied threat against B, however subtle, was clear. They would twist her, break her, or worse. And her legacy, her obsession with the cabin, was a key pressure point. You're threatening me, Wallace. Just stating the facts, Mr. Thorne. Choices. You have them. Think carefully. The line went dead. Ethan slowly lowered the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Sarah, who had been listening, her face pale. Wallace, she whispered, the name a curse. How did he know? That's the chilling part, Sarah. He knows everything, and he got to be within hours of her. Arrest! They're going to use her. Turn her into a weapon against us. Sarah shook her head. But her claims are baseless. Anyone can see that. Doesn't matter, Ethan retorted, his voice tight with frustration. It's not about truth. It's about perception. A deranged woman accusing the elite of corruption plays well with a certain segment of the public. It creates doubt, generates noise. And Albright thrives in noise. It deflects attention from the real issues. He walked to the window, staring out at the mist. The sanctuary he sought in this cabin was irrevocably broken, the peace shattered, and now, the very woman who had invaded it was being twisted into an instrument of his enemy's revenge. He had to call Chen. This new development was critical. It wasn't just a security breach anymore. It was a counter-offensive. He paced the cabin's living room, the splintered coat rack a stark reminder of the night before. This was no longer just about property lines or restraining orders. This was about power, corruption, and the ruthless lengths to which people like Albright and Wallace would go to protect their empires. He had wanted justice for B's harassment, and now, by pushing for it, he had inadvertently handed his enemies a loaded gun. The real fight had just begun, and it wasn't going to be fought in a courtroom, but in the treacherous arena of public perception, with a mentally unstable woman as the unwitting pawn. The weight of the escalating conflict settled upon Ethan, heavy and cold. He had sought peace, but had found himself thrust onto a battlefield where the rules were twisted and the lines blurred. His decision to press charges against B, a simmy. Ethan Thorne's fingers flew across the keyboard, the screen of his secure laptop a blur of text as he typed out a summary of Wallace's chilling phone call. Sarah sat opposite him in the small temporary office they'd set up in a discreet, downtown high-rise, her brow furrowed in concern. The lake cabin was under a full security review, its vulnerability now glaringly apparent. Every window, every sensor, every inch of perimeter was being scrutinized, but for now, their operations had shifted to this anonymous corporate suite. He moved fast, Ethan muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. Too fast. He'd barely had time to get word from the sheriff's office before contacting B, twisting her. It means Albright's reach is deeper than we imagined, or someone very high up tipped him off the moment B was booked. Or they've been cultivating Ms. Stone for a while, Sarah offered, her voice grim. She's a known quantity, a loose cannon, perfect for a smear campaign. Ethan paused, the thought striking him cold. You're right. Wallace wouldn't waste time on a fresh lead unless it was already primed. She must have been talking about me, about corruption, to anyone who would listen, long before last night. They just needed the trigger. He hit send on the encrypted email, dispatching the report directly to David Chen. He knew the Attorney General would be equally concerned. This wasn't just a political counterattack. It was a personal threat, designed to dismantle Ethan's credibility and, by extension, the entire case. Minutes later, his secure phone rang. It was Chen. Ethan. I just received your message. Wallace. He's a viper. Chen's voice was clipped, betraying a rare flicker of anger. He wasted no time. My internal team is already running diagnostics on who might have leaked B's arrest so quickly. Sheriff Thompson is tight-lipped, but Wallace has a way of extracting information. He implied they'd leverage B's delusions, use her wild. Claims about my dark money to derail the prosecution, Ethan explained, pacing the small office. He even suggested they could arrange a transfer for her, get her out of jail if I backed off. Blackmail, Chen stated flatly, and a clear indication they feel truly threatened. They're trying to discredit you, Ethan. If you're perceived as corrupt, your entire testimony, your involvement in acquiring the evidence becomes tainted. It creates reasonable doubt. What do we do about B? Ethan asked. If they get her out, if they put her in front of a camera, it could be a circus. Chen was silent for a moment. We have to anticipate their move. If they manage to secure her release, even temporarily, we issue a public statement. Get ahead of it. Frame her as a mentally unstable individual with a history of delusions who tragically became a pawn in a desperate political attack. The sheriff's records will back us up. And if they try to harm her to silence her, or to create a false narrative of victimhood, Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Wallace's veiled threat about B not doing so well still chilled him. My security detail will ensure she remains in protective custody, even if she's transferred to a psychiatric facility. Her safety is paramount for now. She's evidence, Ethan, a living, breathing, albeit unstable, piece of their desperation. Chen's voice was cold, strategic. We also need to prepare a counter-narrative. Sarah, your insights on public relations will be crucial. We need to be ready to expose Wallace's tactics, his history, if they go public with B. Consider it done, Mr. Attorney General, Sarah said, picking up a notepad and pen, her gaze hardening with resolve. Good. Now, on the Albright evidence. We need to accelerate. Wallace's call confirms their awareness, however vague. We proceed with the grand jury presentation as planned, but we must be watertight. Every detail, every cross-reference, no room for error. The more quickly we move, the less time they have to spin B's narrative effectively. Understood, Ethan affirmed. I'll be ready. The call ended, leaving Ethan with a renewed sense of urgency and a heavy weight on his shoulders. The battle. Lines were drawn, not just in courtrooms and private meetings, but in the treacherous landscape of public perception. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself at the county courthouse, a sterile, impersonal building that felt a million miles away from the quiet solitude of his lake cabin. He was there to meet with the prosecuting attorney handling B's case to formally solidify the charges. He walked past the public defender's office, and a familiar, grating voice drifted out. They're framing me. They stole my land, my great-aunt's cabin. And now they want to put me away just because I know about their dark money deals. The Attorney General is in on it. And Thorne, he's the worst of them all." Ethan froze. B. She was in an interview room, her voice carrying through the thin walls. He peeked through the glass pane of the waiting area. B sat across from a bewildered-looking public defender, her hair still disheveled, her eyes darting around wildly, recounting her delusional narrative with impassioned fervor. She was a broken record, but her words, precisely the ones Wallace had predicted, were now being formally documented. He saw the public defender sigh, then nod, taking notes. This wasn't just a private outburst. This was B inadvertently becoming a credible source of information for Wallace's smear campaign, her irrationality given official weight by the setting. The details of her delusion, particularly her accusation of dark money, would now enter formal records, ready to be selectively leaked and amplified. As Ethan turned to leave, his stomach churning, a sharp metallic click echoed from down the hallway. A heavy-set man in a rumpled suit holding a worn briefcase emerged from a side door. He caught Ethan's eye, a cold, knowing smirk playing on his lips. It was a local private investigator known to have loose ethics and close ties to Wallace. He'd clearly been listening to B's interview, gathering every word, every baseless accusation, ready to package it for public consumption. The PI's smirk widened, a silent acknowledgement of the trap being sprung. Ethan felt a surge of cold fury. They weren't just threatening to use B, they were actively doing it, even as she sat in custody, deluded and vulnerable. He had been so focused on protecting the case against Albright that he had overlooked how easily B, the very person he sought justice from, could be weaponized against him. The public image war was already underway, and the first shot had just been fired, leaving a bitter taste of helplessness in his mouth. The realization hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. He had walked right into Wallace's carefully laid plan. By pressing charges, he hadn't only sought justice, he had inadvertently put B in a position where her fabricated claims could be. The digital world erupted the following morning. It started subtly, a single anonymous blog post on a fringe political website, headlined, "AG's Integrity Crusade Built on Lies. Whistleblower Accuses Key Player of Dark Money Deals." The whistleblower, described only as a concerned citizen with intimate knowledge, was clearly Beatrice Stone. Her delusional ramblings spun into a narrative of courageous exposure against a corrupt establishment. Ethan Thorne stared at the screen, in his temporary office, the words blurring before his eyes. The blog post didn't mention B by name, but it detailed a violent confrontation at a lakeside cabin, a mysterious attorney general, and vague accusations of property theft and unethical financial dealings against a high-powered lawyer assisting the AG. The references were unmistakable. "They're starting small, testing the waters," Sarah said, her voice tight, already on her phone. "This blog is known for sensationalism, but it's a feeder. The mainstream press will pick it up if it gains traction." Ethan's phone vibrated. It was Chen. "Did you see it?" the Attorney General asked, his voice sharp. "Just reading it now, David. Wallace is moving fast." "Indeed. My team identified the leak. It came from a clerk in the sheriff's department, someone with family ties to Wallace's network. She accessed B's intake report and passed on the details. She's been suspended, but the damage is done." "So they're not getting B out?" Ethan asked, a flicker of hope. "Not yet. She's still in custody, but Wallace is pushing hard for a psychiatric evaluation, claiming she's being unjustly held. It's a dual strategy: get her out to parade her, or at least use her victimhood to paint us as oppressive. We need to hit back, David." "Hard," Ethan urged. "We will." "Sarah, have you drafted the counter-statement?" Chen asked, shifting his focus. "Working on it now, Mr. Attorney General," Sarah confirmed. Framing Ms. Stone's history of documented delusions, the restraining order, the property damage, and exposing Wallace's history of dirty tactics and his direct link to Senator Albright. We'll present it as a desperate smear campaign by those facing justice. Good. Release it to our trusted media contacts. Focus on the facts. We don't engage with the blog directly, but we let the responsible journalists piece it together. Chen paused. In the meantime, the grand jury presentation for Albright is accelerated. Tomorrow morning, we need to be ready. This smear campaign is designed to distract, to erode public trust before we even get to court. We cannot let it. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic activity. Sarah worked tirelessly, crafting the counter-narrative, digging up Wallace's past scandals, and preparing a dossier on B's mental history, all carefully anonymized to protect her privacy while underscoring her instability. Ethan reviewed the Albright evidence with a magnifying glass, anticipating every angle the defense would exploit. The pressure was immense, a suffocating blanket of urgency. The next morning, as Ethan arrived at the courthouse for the grand jury presentation, the first ripples of the mainstream media's engagement were already visible. A local news van was parked outside, and a reporter from a mid-tier paper was conducting an impromptu interview with a visibly agitated man who looked suspiciously like a low-level Albright operative. He was parroting phrases from the blog post, talking about abuses of power and politically motivated witch hunts. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Chen met Ethan in a secure waiting room. His face was grim. "The grand jury members will have seen the news. They're not immune to public sentiment. We have to be sharp, Ethan. This is it." The grand jury room was austere, the air heavy with expectation. Ethan, a seasoned litigator, felt an unfamiliar knot in his stomach. He presented the digital evidence, the carefully authenticated server logs, the financial transfers, the undeniable links to Albright's office. He explained the chain of custody, the forensic integrity. He anticipated objections, parried questions, and maintained a cool, professional demeanor. Then, during the cross-examination, a grand juror, a stern-faced woman, interjected. "Mr. Thorne, there have been certain allegations circulating about your own involvement in dark money and land disputes. Are these related to the evidence you're presenting?" The trap was sprung. Wallace's poisoned arrow, delivered by an unwitting citizen. Ethan met her gaze, his mind racing. He had to address it head-on without giving it undue legitimacy. "Madam Juror," he began, his voice clear and steady, "the allegations you refer to stem from a long-standing civil property dispute with a single individual who unfortunately suffers from documented mental health issues. This individual recently violated a court-issued restraining order by trespassing on my property and was apprehended by the local sheriff's department. Her claims are baseless and part of a documented pattern of delusion. They are, in my professional opinion, a desperate and calculated attempt by Senator Albright's allies to distract from the serious evidence of corruption we are presenting today," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the jurors, trying to convey sincerity and transparency. "This is precisely the kind of smear tactic we anticipated from those who stand to lose everything if justice is served. My financial dealings are open to full scrutiny, and I welcome any investigation. They have no bearing on the overwhelming evidence connecting Senator Albright to the bribery ring documented in these files." Chen watched him, a subtle nod of approval. Ethan had navigated the minefield, turning the attack into an illustration of the opponent's desperation. The questioning continued for hours, but the initial uncomfortable silence after the dark money question had dissipated. Ethan had inoculated the jury, at least partially. As the day wore on, another development occurred. While Ethan was still presenting, Sarah received an alert. Wallace had succeeded in getting a court order. not for B's release, but for her transfer to a private psychiatric facility, citing concerns for her mental well-being in a correctional setting. It was a subtle win for Wallace. B was out of the public jail, but not yet free to be paraded. More importantly, it showed Albright's influence extended even to the judiciary. Later that evening, exhausted but buoyed by the day's progress, Ethan and Chen met again in their secure office. "The grand jury went well, Ethan," Chen said, pouring them both a whiskey. "You handled that question expertly. They seem to buy our narrative on B." "For now," Ethan cautioned, taking a sip. "But Wallace got her moved. She's still a wild card." "Yes," Chen agreed, a thoughtful expression on his face. "But her being in a private facility gives us a different kind of control. My team will monitor her closely there, and the grand jury's verdict will be swift. I'm confident. The evidence is too strong." Just then Sarah entered, her face grim. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Attorney General." Something just broke. A major news outlet, the Daily Ledger, just published an exposé. Not about B, about the leak source for the blog post. Ethan felt a surge of hope, then dread. "They caught the clerk?" "No," Sarah said, shaking her head slowly. "It's bigger." The article reveals that the sheriff's clerk was not acting alone. She was coerced, and the coercion came directly from a high-ranking member of Senator Albright's own staff. Not Wallace, but Albright's chief of staff. And the article has photographic evidence of the chief of staff meeting with the clerk hours before the leak, and wire transfers to the clerk's offshore account. Chen slammed his glass down on the table, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. His eyes, usually so composed, blazed with cold fury. "Albright's chief of staff? The one who constantly preaches transparency?" "It gets worse," Sarah continued, her voice barely a whisper. The article details how the chief of staff used an encrypted messaging app to instruct the clerk, not just to leak B's story, but to plant specific false accusations about your dark money connections. It's all laid out. The messages. The timestamps, the bank transfers. They tried to frame you, Mr. Thorne, and they got caught red-handed. The reporter attributes it to an anonymous source inside Albright's inner circle who got cold feet. The room was silent, save for the hum of the office lights. Ethan felt a profound sense of vindication, followed by a chilling realization. Albright hadn't just tried to muddy the waters. He had directly orchestrated a felony, trying to frame a key witness. But in his desperation, he had overplayed his hand. The irony was devastating. In trying to weaponize Beatrice Stone's delusion and Ethan's personal pursuit of justice, Albright had exposed his own criminal actions, not just corruption, but witness tampering and conspiracy to defame. The very desperation that led him to play dirty had become his undoing, turning the tide of public opinion not against Ethan, but squarely against him.